Good afternoon. We've established quorum. The meeting can begin.
Everybody, good afternoon. Thank you for joining today's meeting. We're gonna have a great discussion today. Give me one. Is Manju also on? Just want to confirm.
Yes, I am on.
Awesome. I think I can kick it off by introducing myself. My name is Ronaldo Villeda. I was appointed by the Attorney General. Been on the board now for a few years. Yeah, and I'll pass it over to Manju.
Hi, everyone. Manju Kulkarni with API Equity Alliance. Also was nominated by Speaker Emeritus Anthony Rendon. Look forward to today's conversation. I don't know why my camera is not working. I'm trying to work on that right now, but thank you all for joining.
Can other board members present on the call please introduce themselves?
Sure. Good morning or good afternoon. This is Angela Sierra. I'm an attorney with the California Department of Justice in our Civil Rights Enforcement section, and I'm Attorney General Bonta's designee on the board. Let's see, I'll pass it on to Captain Autori.
Hey, good afternoon. Yeah, Captain Jose Alatorre with the California Highway Patrol, representing our department.
Should we just jump on in?
Yeah.
Wade Ford, lead pastor at the 16th Street St. David's Church on the beautiful west side of San Bernardino. Here, appointee of Bob Bonta and a faith leader and representative of the faith community.
Is there anyone else? Is that it?
I think we have Rich Randolph. Did I see him here? Log on.
Good afternoon. I apologize for my late attendance. Chair Villeda, Rich Randolph, Fontana School Police Chief, representative for PORAC. Good to see all of you. I apologize.
And with that, we can move to the approval of our March 12th, 2026 meeting minutes. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
Second.
A second.
Sorry, I couldn't hear. Who made the motion?
I'll make the motion to move. I'll move to approve the minutes from the last meeting.
Okay. And Manju, you seconded.
Yes.
Great. Pending as a motion to approve the March 12th subcommittee meeting minutes. Board Member Alatorre, how do you vote?
Yay.
Board Member Ford?
Yay.
Co-Chair Kulkarni?
Yay.
Board Member Randolph?
Yay.
Board Member Sierra?
Yay.
And Co-Chair Villeda?
Yay.
Okay, the motion carries with 6 ayes, no nays, and no abstentions. Thank you.
And with that, I'll pass it over to the Department of Justice for updates.
Good afternoon, everyone. Again, we're presenting on several topics today. Before we dive in, I will provide the subcommittee an overview of the post-draft and where we are in the drafting process. This year, the subcommittee is concluding its review of post-field training program, or the FTP. This was a 2-year process that began with the 2026 report. The draft consists of 5 sections. The first is the introduction, starts at page 1. The second is an overview of the subcommittee's work during its first 10 years, which is from pages 1 to 6. The third section is the post-FTP review and recommendations, and that is section 3, pages 6 through 21. And the fourth section is the AB 953 RIPA course guidelines review and recommendations. That's from pages 21 and 23. And the last section is a vision for future reports, currently at page 23. Today's update will focus on the post-FTP review and recommendations. However, I want to highlight other sections so that the subcommittee can provide guidance or recommendations to our office. In particular, I'd like to point out that consistent with the past, present, future theme of this year's RIPA report, the POST subcommittee has outlined some of the past board recommendations to POST and to the California legislature during the past decade in section 2 at pages 1 through 6 of the chapter. So please let us know if you'd like to see anything else in that section to help further the overall theme of past, present, and future. Next slide, please. Thank you. So today's agenda, there are 4 items on today's agenda. The subcommittee co-chair departure and election, which my colleague Aisha will discuss. The DOJ consultant field training program review, the post subcommittee member section 6 FTP review, and RIPA course guidelines review and materials package.
Okay, thank you, Marisol. Good morning, everyone. The first item listed in the agenda is the departure of Subcommittee Co-Chair Manju Kulkarni. Member Kulkarni is an attorney and executive director of the AAPI Equity Alliance, a coalition of community-based organizations serving Asian and Pacific Islanders in Los Angeles County. Appointed to the RIPA board in 2021 by former California Assembly Speaker Anthony Rendon, board member Kulkarni served on the policy subcommittee and as a co-chair on the former Calls for Service subcommittee, and of course currently serving as a co-chair of the post subcommittee. So we just want to genuinely recognize member Kulkarni for her service, her guidance, her participation and leadership on these subcommittees and contributions to the annual RIPA reports during her tenure. So thank you, Co-Chair Kulkarni. Because of Co-Chair Kulkarni's departure, that means that the subcommittee will be electing a new co-chair at the next subcommittee meeting in September. Subcommittee members can nominate themselves or others for consideration. If you are interested in becoming a co-chair or in nominating another subcommittee member or have questions about the process, please feel free to reach out to the DOJ team at any time. Okay.
We're now going to turn to the FTP review. As you know, DOJ contracted with 2 expert consultants to support the board's review, one with expertise in law enforcement academic research, including the study of bias, and the other a former California law enforcement executive with 37 years of operational experience. Like the subcommittee members, these consultants reviewed post-FTP materials. The consultants' review was limited to the written post-FTP materials themselves. Consistent with the board's review, the consultants did not assess how individual law enforcement agencies implement the materials in practice. A summary of the consultants' review and assessment can be found in greater detail on pages 6 through 21 of the draft. Next slide, please. So this is an overview of the consultant assessment. They noted that the FTP establishes statewide minimum standards for field training, that the evaluation of trainees relies heavily on individual FTO judgment and experience, that the daily observation report assesses 31 competencies, that there's limited guidance for evaluating race, culture, procedural justice, and implicit bias, and the written FTP materials influence policing culture and professional norms. The consultants found that the FTP serves as a baseline framework rather than a comprehensive curriculum. While trainees are evaluated daily through the DOR and standardized evaluation guidelines, the process depends significantly on individual FTO discretion. The consultants emphasize that because the FTP represents statewide expectations, the content and language of the program play an important role in shaping officer behavior, professional standards, and policing culture across agencies. Next slide, please. So within the DOJ consultant assessment, they identified gaps in community relations and bias-free policing. As previously discussed, only one of 31 competencies directly addresses community relationships, and this was discussed in the chapter. The DOR lacks explicit standards for equity, respect, empathy, procedural justice, de-escalation, and bias-free policing. The consultants also noted that existing references to culture and community are limited in scope, and reliance on behavioral observations may not fully address implicit bias concerns. The consultants noted that community interaction and legitimacy receive relatively little attention within the current evaluation structure. Consultants also highlighted that perceptions of suspicious behavior can themselves be influenced by implicit bias, making it important to provide more explicit guidance and evaluation criteria related to fair and equitable policing. Next slide, please. Within their assessment, they also made recommendations on profiling, trust, and community engagement. They suggested strengthening instruction on racial and identity profiling, reinstating explicit anti-profiling language, addressing harms to legitimacy and community trust, expanding discussion of stop data, accountability, and bias prevention, increasing emphasis on respect, equity, procedural justice, community partnership, and de-escalation. The consultants noted a central theme that effective policing depends on community trust and legitimacy. The consultants recommended more direct discussion of racial and identity profiling, including practical examples and accountability measures. They also urged greater emphasis on procedural justice and respectful treatment, helping officers understand how their actions influence public trust and the public's willingness to cooperate with law enforcement. Next slide, please. Within their assessment, they also discussed aligning the FTP with more modern policing standards. So they identified key areas for improvement. The consultants suggested instructional specificity, behavioral expectations, outcome-based evaluation, procedural justice and legitimacy, implicit bias and profiling, cultural and historical context, evaluator consistency, and academy to field training alignment. Additional RIPA-related opportunities that consultants identified include educating trainees on agency trust building efforts, reinforcing obligations to prevent and report bias, and using local stop data trends to improve awareness and accountability. The consultants found that the discussions of culture and history in Section 6 are too narrow compared to the more comprehensive treatment provided in the Basic Academy Learning Domain 42. They recommended incorporating local community history, historical harms, and ongoing impacts into field training. Because the FTP relies heavily on individual evaluators, the consultants also recommended strengthening FTO guidance and training to ensure more consistent evaluations statewide. Next slide, please.
Okay, now that you've heard the consultants' summaries, I'll present the summaries by the post-subcommittee members who actually conducted the review of Section 6. Next slide, please. The FTP review rubric had several dimensions, and the members rated 4: compliance with Penal Code Section 13519.4, continuity of content, inclusion of core values, and outcome-based training. Next slide, please. As you know, the review criteria was organized around 4 primary areas. The board members were asked to provide rubric responses in the following areas. Assign a rating to each appropriate section of the rubric. Provide examples from materials to support the rating. Offer comments, suggestions, and/or recommendations. Include sections that you have for post regarding each dimension and include any general feedback observations. Next slide, please. With regards to rubric 1, compliance with PC 13519.4, post subcommittee members requested clarification regarding how FTOs are trained to evaluate cultural competency, whether stop data reporting obligations are addressed elsewhere in the FTP outside of Section 6, and whether additional standardized tools or prompts are available to support consistent evaluation. They also provided these assessments. Reviewers were split as to whether the FTP is fully compliant. They also commented on varying levels of confidence in the FTO preparedness. They finally identified some gaps, including limited references to stop data collection requirements, insufficient emphasis on implicit bias and the harms of profiling. They found there was gaps in limited discussion of sexual orientation, gender identity, and hate crimes. Finally, the materials lack the clear behavioral guidance regarding culturally responsive interactions across diverse communities. Next slide, please. And actually, before I get to this slide, I just want to remind everyone that a more complete description of the reviewer's assessments of rubric Dimension 1 can be found on pages 9 and 10 of the draft. Okay, on this slide, with regards to Dimension 2, continuity of content, reviewers provided the following assessments. They described the continuity of content as strong, but uneven in some topic areas. There was potential disconnects where in the area of prior learning, not explicitly referenced or meaningfully expanded upon. They identified gaps, and they are limited reinforcement of implicit bias instruction, inconsistent treatment of sexual orientation and gender identity topics, and finally, insufficient integration of contemporary community engagement practices. Okay, next slide. The third dimension, inclusion of core values. Reviewers provide the following assessments. Present but inconsistently operationalized. So they were consistent but inconsistently operationalized in the materials. The materials emphasize the importance of making values-based expectations observable and measurable, and they identify the following gaps. Insufficient emphasis on the harms of profiling, limited discussion on implicit bias and otherizing, potential reliance on culturally narrow communications or norms, and lack of explicit behavioral examples tied to procedural justice and legitimacy building. Post subcommittee members requested additional information regarding whether FTOs are directed to use LD3 and LD42 during evaluations, and whether more explicit continuity mechanisms exist between academy training, field training, and continuing professional training. They also requested additional clarification regarding how values-based competencies are calibrated across evaluators and whether stronger behavioral anchors or examples could be incorporated into the DOR and evaluation standards. And again, a complete description of the reviewer's assessment of both continuity of content, Dimension 2 and 3 can be found on pages 10 and 11 of the draft. Next slide, please. With regard to Dimension 4, outcome-based training, reviewers provided these assessments: strong behavioral expectations, but inconsistent specificity. Regarding the DOR, or daily observation report, they suggested incorporating additional evaluation methods, including community feedback, standardized evaluator calibration, and enhanced narrative documentation guidance. The gaps they identified were inconsistent evaluator interpretation, limited specificity regarding behavioral outcomes, insufficient incorporation of contemporary community engagement expectations. Board members requested clarification regarding how evaluator consistency is maintained across FTOs and whether POST intends to strengthen behavioral anchors, diversity-related performance standards, or documentation guidance in future revisions. And again, Dimension 4, as with the other 3 dimensions, can be found in the draft 2027 report section on POST. And for this particular dimension, you will find them on pages 11 and 12. Thank you.
Thanks, Aisha. In advance of this meeting and following the subcommittee's assessment of the FTP materials, DOJ provided the subcommittee's feedback to POST. So as you heard, Aisha identified questions that board members had related to each specific dimension. And we asked POST to address the subcommittee's questions, and POST written response will be incorporated into the next draft. And you all received copies of POST responses, but today we're going to delve into them so that as a subcommittee, you can have a more fruitful discussion. Next slide, please. So these again are the 4 questions posed to POST. The first one's related to the first dimension, so compliance with the penal code section. How are FTOs trained to evaluate cultural competency? Are stop data reporting obligations addressed elsewhere in the FTP? And are there additional standardized tools or prompts available to support consistent evaluation? Questions related to the second dimension, continuity of content. Are FTOs directed to use LD3 and LD42 during evaluations? Do more explicit continuity mechanisms exist between academy training, field training, and continuing professional training, or CPT? Questions related to the third dimension, inclusion of core values. How are values-based competencies calibrated across evaluators? Can stronger behavioral anchors or examples be incorporated into the DOR and evaluation standards? And lastly, questions related to outcome-based training. How is evaluator consistency maintained across FTOs? And does POST intend to strengthen behavioral anchors, diversity-related performance standards, or documentation guidance in future revisions? Next slide. So these are POST responses related to cultural competency and bias-free policing. POST noted that the current FTO training includes procedural justice and equitable treatment, implicit and explicit bias recognition, cultural awareness and protected classes, and penal code bias-free policing requirements. POST also noted that evaluation focus areas include respectful interactions across demographic groups, consistent application of laws and discretion, awareness of community perceptions, documentation, coaching, and remediation of issues. Next slide, please. With regards to standardized evaluation accountability tools, POST noted that the tools available to support consistency include standardized DOR language, behavioral rating anchors, FTP checklist and sign-off forms, FTO cue cards and prompts, scenario evaluation rubrics, and audit and feedback mechanisms. With regards to stop data training, POST noted that these are introduced during orientation and policy training, reinforced during field activities, and evaluated through documentation and testing. And just to note that in terms of tools available to support consistency, POST noted that some of these, and this is in their response, are available to agencies, and agencies can use them at their own discretion. POST identified several tools that agencies can use to improve consistency in evaluating trainees. These include behaviorally anchored rating scales, standardized evaluation language, training checklists, and structured rubrics. And agencies may also audit feedback systems to monitor DORs, stop data reporting, and coaching practices. Regarding RIPA compliance, stop data reporting is commonly taught during orientation, reinforced during patrol activities, and evaluated through documentation reviews and scenario-based assessments. And the FDOs are expected to verify that trainees properly complete required stop data entries and understand reporting requirements. And one thing that I neglected to mention regarding with compliance with the penal code section is that POST noted that FTOs receive instruction on the statutory requirements and practice evaluating these concepts through scenarios and role-playing exercises. And during evaluations, FTOs are expected to assess whether trainees demonstrate respectful treatment, unbiased decision-making, and awareness of how their actions may affect public trust. They also noted that agencies may also capture these behaviors through performance dimensions, such as community relations, professionalism, and ethics. Next slide, please. With regards to training continuity, the current state of the FTP has FTOs not specifically directed to use LD3 or LD42 during evaluations, and the continuity primarily occurs through the SEGs and the DORs. POST noted that there are recommended continuity practices that agencies may or may not apply. Curriculum mapping between academy and FTP competencies, cross-references between LD3 and LD42 concepts, shared behavioral expectations and scenarios, academy to FTP handoff documentation, and CPT reinforcement of key competencies. POST clarified that while FTOs are expected to reinforce concepts taught in learning domains 3 and 42, there's no statewide requirement directing evaluators to explicitly use those learning domains during assessments. Continuity often depends on agency practices. POST identified several best practices, behavioral expectations, shared scenarios, and formal handoff information from academy training to field training. Agencies can also reinforce these competencies through continued professional training to create a more consistent learning progression through an officer's career. Next slide, please. And in terms of key takeaways and future direction, POST said that evaluator consistency will be maintained through SEGs and DORs, and that value-based competencies are supported by the rating guidance, and that there are no planned changes to the DORs or Section 6 at this time. The overall themes identified by POST include existing training addresses cultural competency and bias repolicing. Agencies have flexibility to strengthen continuity and evaluation practices, and additional standardization tools are available, but not uniformly required. POST's overall position is that evaluator consistency is already supported through the SEGs, or standardized evaluation guidelines, and the daily observation reports, or the DORs. The agency noted that guidance for values-based competencies exists within current rating suggestions and emphasized that agencies have access to multiple tools to enhance evaluation consistency. POST stated that it does not currently anticipate revisions to Section 6, the DOR, or related evaluation standards. As a result, many of the enhancements discussed by consultants and subcommittee members that we've heard about today remain opportunities for agencies to implement voluntarily rather than statewide requirements. Now I'll turn it over to Aisha.
Okay, now we're going to go to the RIPA course guidelines review and materials package. Before turning it back to the subcommittee for further discussion of the FTP, we wanted to discuss your pending and final review of the year, which is the RIPA course guidelines review. In the 2023 to 2026 RIPA reports, the RIPA board consistently recommended that that POST create and publish clear standalone guidelines separate from training curricula to ensure consistency, transparency, and compliance with California law. In 2025, Post published the AB 953 RIPA course guidelines. After approving the guidelines, Post clarified that the guidelines set minimum standards for a 4-hour course addressing legal prohibitions on racial and identity profiling and related training objectives for California law enforcement. The board believes these guidelines on racial and identity profiling are an opportunity to align all law enforcement training to more effectively tackle barriers to eliminating racial and identity profiling by individual officers and law enforcement agencies. Next slide, please. Unlike the FTP packet that was 381 pages long, the RIPA course guidelines review package is only 66 pages long. And like the FTP packet, it consists of core materials and background materials. These are 1, the California Penal Code Section 13519.4, 2, the Post-Commission Report on RIPA course guidelines update, 3, the Post-RIPA course guidelines, and 4, Post-Commission Bulletin on the approval of RIPA course guidelines. The background materials include excerpts and links to the RIPA course guidelines related discussions and/or recommendations in the 2023 through 2026 RIPA reports. 2, excerpts from the 2023 and 2024 post reports on recommendations made by the RIPA board related to the RIPA course guidelines. And finally, 3, excerpts and links of post-commission discussions on the RIPA course guidelines. Next slide.
We would like to acknowledge the amount of time and effort that this subcommittee has put into the FTP review. We truly appreciate your dedication and commitment. We were very happy with the number of subcommittee members who submitted their rubrics and had representation from various stakeholders, including law enforcement and community-based organizations. For this next review, you'll not use a rubric to review the RIPA course guidelines. Instead, you will answer these 4 questions. 1, do these RIPA guidelines reflect the legal requirements of Penal Code Section 13519.4? 2, can they function as a comprehensive framework for all RIPA-related training and/or suggest how to expand them if they don't? 3, are they clear, practical, and structured in a way that agencies can translate into policy, training, and supervision? And lastly, do they include mechanisms to measure training outcomes? You will have 3 weeks to complete your review. Your answers to these 4 questions are due on or by July 1st. You can email your answers to me and Aisha, just as you emailed your completed rubrics for the FTP review. This concludes the DOJ updates portion of the meeting. Thanks so much for your continued work on this important subcommittee. And we'll turn it over to the co-chairs.
Thank you very much, DOJ, for that update. And with that, we'll go into item 5 of the agenda, which is our discussion on the FTP review. So last year, the post subcommittee, we identified 3 questions related to the FTP. And now that we've heard the summaries of the Cal DOJ consultants review and our subcommittee's review, I believe we're in a better position to answer these 3 questions. The first question is, what values does the FTP teach? And do those values align with the goals of AB 953? How well do the FTP materials cover potential for bias and racial identity profiling? How do trainees learn about bias reducing police tactics and community engagement? How are trainees evaluated on eliminating bias and engaging with community? And the last question is, how well do FTP materials and training align with academy training and LD3 principled policing in the community and or LD 42 cultural diversity and discrimination? Do we want to take those one at a time? How do we want to have this discussion? I'm going to kind of let other subcommittee members also chime in here. If you want to take them one at a time, just have a broad discussion. How would you guys like to proceed for this section? Go ahead, Rich.
Hey, sir, I was just wondering, are we gonna have a group discussion on the overall report? Are you gonna break, are you gonna do that after we go through the 1 through 3?
Yes, for this specific agenda item, it's the review. We're reviewing the guiding questions that brought us here today. Yeah, and then we're going to dive into the responses and then the report.
Copy. Thank you.
Angela, I see your hand is up.
Yes, thank you, Ronnie. You know, I'm not sure if this is as relevant to these questions or to our following discussion about the input that we went through with the with Marisol and Aisha went through, because I just sort of what's kind of on my mind right now is I'm a little bit stuck because I feel like I personally listening to all of this is a lot, you know, to digest here. And it seems like there's some outstanding questions, and to one being, do we need to know a little bit more about the field officer, the training that the field training officers receive? And then there was like references to other materials such as these FTO cue cards or other scenarios that are available. And is that something that would be helpful for us to see? Because a lot of this is, you know, how these standards are being implemented, you know, is part of this evaluation. I mean, we are looking only at the field training materials, but I think it just becomes natural to kind of wonder how are those standards being interpreted typically by the field training officers? So there's part of me that feels like I would like some more information about how the training officers are trained and what other materials they may have that were referenced earlier. And there's one other just question I had about the PowerPoint that we saw. I think there was a discussion about the data entry, the RIPA reporting, and I'm not sure if the correct slide was up for that. And that was something I thought it'd be helpful just to see again, because I'm still a little unsure about whether this field training, the aspects of the field training that we were looking at, does that also cover the data reporting, or is that covered elsewhere? So I just wanted to bring it up. These are kind of some big general questions I had in trying to, for me personally, to kind of further evaluate kind of all the materials that we're seeing today. And I don't know if that would be helpful for others as well. But you know, those are just some of the things on my mind.
Yeah, thumbs up by Board Member Ford. So just to reframe, we would want DOJ to pull up the slide again for the discussion.
Yeah, yeah. I think the slide about the data collection, about whether is that covered in these materials, is that meant to be covered in the aspects of the field training guide that we reviewed, or is that covered elsewhere? And I believe Marisol, I think you discussed that during your presentation, but I just wanted to see that part again. And then the second thing is, would it be valuable to learn a little bit more about the training that the field officer trainers are receiving and some of the other materials that they may have when we're looking at kind of consistency among them and what they are being taught in addition to what we're seeing on these FTP materials.
Angela, I don't know if, I know that this was a long time ago, but in last year's report, there's an
Mhm.
overview of the field training program and FTP materials and what the FTOs have to, the type of training that the FTOs have to go through on their own.
Mhm. Okay.
So that's in pages 182 through 185 of last year's
Okay.
report. And it talks about the role of the FTO, the role of the FTO supervisor, the kind of training that they undergo. And
Mhm.
if you'd like additional information beyond what's there, we can certainly offer that and provide that. Of
Thank you, Marisol. Yeah, I'll go back and look at that. Thank you.
course.
And I'm seeing multiple hands up. Let's go with Rich Randolph first.
Thank you, Chair Vieta. I was looking at the FTO training, so it's going to be, I can do some clarification for you, Ms. Sierra. So it's going to be the FTO class, and then they also have FTO refreshers that they also have to do. So, and just for everyone on the committee here, they also have mandatory training. We all have mandatory training we have to do throughout the year. So, and that could be everything as far as just defensive tactics and basics. They have multiple different learning domains that are thrown in during the CPT training, and that's a post requirement statewide. So I look forward to the ending of when we have the discussion, but I would like to add that as we talk about training for our trainees, that we as a board also need to dive into for ourselves and learn a little bit more on the training program ourselves and seeing what goes on. I understand the AB 953. I love that. That's what we're here for. But we also have like over 42 different other learning domains, everything from search and seizure, how to operate a vehicle. This is one small component. And as someone who has trained dozens of peace officers that are now serving throughout our state, it's a work in progress. Racial discrimination and bias can be identified during the background process. And then, of course, yeah, they get hired and go through the academy. And then after the FTO just gives them the tools and pushes them on. And then it's up to supervision to monitor them as they continue to serve our respectful communities. And when those discrepancies are identified, it's addressed. And we now have laws that enforce that. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Board Member Randolph. See, Manju, you have your hand up as well.
Yeah, and I don't know if this is sort of goes to the question that's been asked now, but I wanted to raise two kind of overarching questions or issues that I saw. One is, as I understand it, what we reviewed in terms of the materials and the FTP are what Post uses, but that there are many law enforcement departments that do not use Post training materials, and that would be done by officers who do not undergo this training. So if that is an accurate statement, I think something for this committee to look at moving forward is what is the number of and percentage of entities that do not go through this, and then how do they also get adequate training. The other is, a couple of years back, some of us attended one of the Post trainings for field training officers. And what was really quite surprising to me in that is that there was a lack of sort of fundamental or foundational knowledge about even RIPA that I found to be quite concerning, which is that no one in that room outside of DOJ or members of the RIPA board understood or knew that the data that's provided from stops is all anonymized. So not a single person in that room knew that. And I found that honestly to be quite shocking because, of course, they're going to have a negative attitude. They're going to be defensive in not wanting RIPA data to be collected or provided. And so if field training officers themselves don't know that, then how is it that they are providing adequate and appropriate training to the officers? Because there may then be, and in not necessarily in a maleficent way, information that's being shared that is inaccurate to your rank and file officers about RIPA. So I wanted to raise that because, again, I think those of us who are in the room were quite shocked by it. And this seems to me to be really foundational information when all officers in California are trained on RIPA.
You, Board Member Kulkarni. I believe I still have one more hand up. Is that Board Member Ford? Or is it Board Member Randolph?
Sorry, sir, it's old hand. I'll wait till the end. I apologize.
Want to chime in, Board Member Ford?
No, I didn't actually have a comment. Thought I saw Rich's hand go up. It may be just a confusion because of the beautiful glasses that we're both wearing. But no, I didn't have anything I wanted to contribute. Thank you.
Got it. Thank you. So for the purposes of this agenda item and the questions before us, do we have any input from board members? Would you guys like me to review the questions again? Or do you guys feel like we don't have enough information yet to have this discussion?
So let me just jump in and say, I think that there's a great deal of information for the discussion. Because of the vast amount of the information, I would like to take opportunity to be able to look over the information a little bit more in depth, to be able to have a more educated response to the questions. It's a lot of info, good stuff. I'm a little bit newer than all of you all, but I just would like a little bit more time to be able to process it all.
Fair enough, Board Member Ford. I guess I'm going to turn here to DOJ for some guidance. Do we conclude this section, or do we? I mean, I can also give a little bit of just my perspective, if that helps. But yeah.
Well, I think that if I know that Board Member Sierra wanted to look at a slide, and I don't know if she wants to see that slide now before concluding this part of the agenda, or if that's part of a conversation related to responses to the questions that subcommittee members had, or if that's generally part of the conversation about the report draft, because there are two separate discussions from this one that are scheduled for today. So there's this one with the 3 guiding questions that the subcommittee identified last year to guide the FTP review, and it was part of the FTP packet that you all received. There's a discussion pending after this one and after the break related to post responses to the questions that this subcommittee had during their review and that they noted in the rubrics. And then the last discussion is specific to the report draft and to what the consultants had to say. And so if the vast majority of the subcommittee members feel like they want additional time to answer these specific questions, they could be added to the 4 questions that you will be answering about the guidelines review. So then it would be 7 questions basically that would be due in 3 weeks. If that's something that the subcommittee feels would give them more time to wrestle with these specific 3 questions about the FTP to conclude the subcommittee's review of the FTP and then move forward with the AB 953 guidelines review. So that is a suggestion if folks want more time and want to reflect on these questions in writing.
Thank you, Marisol. Board Member Sierra?
Yes, thank you. I for one think that may be a good way to go, because as I'm looking at the first question, and trying to integrate what is in our current draft, which talks about what our consultants, their assessment of the FTP materials, as well as, our subcommittee members' assessment, and they were some mixed, some found, that this was very strong, some felt, well, some was covered, but it could be strengthened. And I feel like for me to be able to really, I would need to kind of think more about the collective observations and think about those collective observations before answering these. On my first glance, number one, I feel that the values of AB 953 in general were represented in these FTP materials, but we did find, there was some discussion about ways they could be strengthened, for example. But I kind of feel like we need more time to really think through that and look at what our collective observations were before being able to helpfully discuss this. But I'd love to hear others' views on that.
Any other board member thoughts? Go ahead, Mr. Randolph.
Thank you, Chair Vieta. I totally agree with Angela. I think we need some more time. And I'll just use this as a scenario because I have lived it. Is when you're talking about a trainee, which we're talking about right now, basically a trainee, that's what the whole purpose of this committee is right now. What we're talking about is the FTO program. And if there's a trainee that is not meeting their training standards, okay, we don't rush it. We will sit down. We will sit down with other FTOs that had their hands in the training of this officer, whether it's a female or male, and we will roundtable a supervision and give it some time and triangulate what we need to do. Are we going to go back another phase? Are we going to let this employee go? And that's just that's a broad scope. So instead of us rushing through this, because there's a lot of information here that was thrown out to the subcommittee, and I'm glad that we're having this conversation. Thank you, Angela, Mr. Ford. I'm glad you guys are wanting to dive into this because everyone on this call has got a job. I mean, I couldn't do what Ronnie's job is. Mr. Ford, I couldn't do what you do. Ms. Carcani, I couldn't do what you did. But I'd have to learn. But one thing I do know is, as far as training goes, I'm not going to sit here and judge how Angela got her degree and how she does her job every day in 2 weeks. It takes a big, broad scope to train a cop. So I just wanted to say, I think we all need to digest. I did not do I will admit, I did not do the homework that was instituted by the Department of Justice. I did not feel like that was necessary because I know what I need to do as a peace officer. So I'm a little concerned about these homework assignments, which are coming out on, we're talking about, because I know people saw our last meeting and there was quite a bit of talk with cops, other chiefs, and legislators on how we're doing homework assignments on law enforcement training when some of us have never done that before. And I'm not discounting anyone on this call because they all have got some pretty strong jobs right here. And I could not do what any of you do. I try to learn, but when we're talking about modifying training or we're not doing what we need to do, I just think we should take a step back. Thank you so much, Chairman Vieta.
Thank you, Board Member Randolph. I guess just for the sake of this section, I'm just a little bit of input on kind of my thoughts. I think we're in a much better position to answer these questions. We have these two independent reviews, one by the consultants, one by us. And to me, it feels like, our findings kind of converged, right? The consultants found that the evaluation is heavily reliant on individual like FTO judgment. And out of like the, 31 competencies that are assessed in the daily observation report, only one of those directly addresses community relationships. So, in their findings, there's limited guidance for evaluating race, culture, procedural justice, and implicit bias. And then I believe that through our rubric and our responses, we kind of reached, parallel conclusions with the consultants. The values are present, but they're like inconsistently operationalized, right? There's like inconsistent evaluator interpretation. And there's like a lack of like clear guidance, right? Like, what does it look like in practice? So, as it pertains to the first question, right? Like, what values does the FTP teach, and do those values align with the goals of AB 953? I think for me, it's the question that comes to my head is, is naming the value equivalent to teaching it, right? Because through the consultants' work, and their examination of these daily observation reports, there's, they found like no explicit standard for equity, right? So like there isn't, one for like respect or empathy, right? And I just named a few as well, like de-escalation or like bias-free policing, right? And I think, those values are central to the statute, and none of them really carry like a defined standard. And the instrument is used to evaluate, the trainees' kind of like daily interactions with the community. And through like my own personal lived experience, right? Like, I believe it was like section 6 we were talking about. It was like, don't use profanity, or like, like it was like a section on language, right? Like no inappropriate gestures or no offensive terms, right? But I think to me, it's just like, it still doesn't, you can forego those things, but you can still like, there's still ways to escalate a contact, right? There's still ways to profile. There's still ways to like conduct encounters in ways that can damage community trust, right? Between community and law enforcement. So, and just from my lived experience with law enforcement, right? From being in like a monitored institutional setting, out to the community, where like my experiences were materially different. I think, those, to me, it shows that like, we could measure the performance, but how do we measure, how do we continue to capture it in practice, right? Yeah, and so, as I think about like this section, I think, we have these 2 reviews. I think we're having the same kind of thought processes. We're reaching the same conclusions. Yeah, and for me, it's just, it comes back to that, right? Like, how do we, as a subcommittee and as a board, address some of those underlying issues that have been consistent now for us through these findings. And I will pass it to Mr. Randolph.
Thank you so much, Chairman Vieta, and thank you for sharing that. And I'm glad we're having this conversation, because that's why we're here, right? But I do want to say, I mean, you talked about bias. I mean, peace officers, even in training, being biased, being respectful, things of that nature. It starts like through the background process. I mean, when an officer, when I go to someone's house and you tell me about Angela, how was she growing up? How was she in high school? Talk to me. Did you see, if you look at the basic questions, have you ever seen any kind of bias? Have you ever seen them discriminate against someone? And then it triangulates into 3 or 4 more people, that background process, then the psychological eval, then going to people's neighbors. And it starts there. Then we put them in the academy and we evaluate them again. They all evaluate each other. And then we put them in a car and we expose them. So this process is always going on. So the FTO starts to propel them, and then they go off and where they're a peace officer. So this is all, it's what I'm saying is basically AB 953. It's not the focal point right there in field training. It's a part, but it continues for the rest of their career. In our state, we've put laws in, RIPA, things of that nature, which protect those things. So I'm glad that we're having these conversations, and I'm glad you share that, Ronnie, about your personal experience. I can say from my personal experience, I have seen things with a trainee which were inappropriate, and I made that necessary documentation, and the DOR allowed me to do that. And then it went to a supervisor, and things were handled and went down a certain direction. So I'm glad we're talking about this here, and I'm glad members of the board want to talk about it and digest it a little bit more. Thank you.
We can certainly add this to the agenda for the next subcommittee meeting to continue this part of the conversation. I want to be cognizant of the fact that we've been going for an hour and we need
Yes.
a break. But before that, I just want to address the comments about the reviews and homework on page 3 of this draft of this year's report. There's a long list of the different courses that this committee has reviewed over the last decade since the RIPA mandate was enacted. And that means that every year, this particular committee has undertaken a lot of work. And it's a lot of work beyond what a lot of the other subcommittees have done or are doing, because it does require hours of review outside of these meetings. So this is not a new thing. It's been happening for 10 years. And with the FTP being so crucial and complex, this subcommittee made the decision to do a 2-year review to acknowledge how complicated it was. And it made the decision as a committee to hire 2 consultants, experts in their field, to guide this committee in these conversations. And just another thing that I want to point out is that the subcommittee members and the members of the RIPA board as a whole are here representing specific government entities. You were appointed. So you're here not just in your individual capacity with your personal experiences, but you're here representing an organization or a government entity, and that comes with huge responsibility. So I just want to acknowledge all the work that you've all been doing outside of these meetings to have these types of discussions. And with that, we'll have a 5-minute break. If you all can please come back at 1:18 p.m. Thank you. We're back from our break. If you're a board member, please turn your camera on. And if you're a member of the public, please keep your camera off and kindly mute yourself until the public comment period. We've established quorum, so we can begin. Co-Chair Vieta.
Thank you, Marisol. Now we're diving into post responses. Yeah, so earlier we heard like a summary, well, we heard a summary of post responses to our committee's questions about the FTP. So now we have some time to discuss it as a group. I think maybe the way that I can do this, I think we could just do it in 5 parts. We can start with cultural competency training for FTOs. So for the cultural competency training for FTOs, post response states that FTOs receive this training through post approved FTO courses and recertification, covering procedural justice, implicit and explicit bias recognition, cultural awareness, and the requirements of Penal Code 13519.4, with evaluation focus on respectful interactions, consistent application of the law, and discretion, and awareness of community perceptions. So the 2 questions for the group here today is, the first one is there any additional information that would give the RIPA board confidence that cultural competency is being evaluated consistently across agencies? And the second question is, should post establish more standardized statewide expectations for evaluating cultural competency, or should agencies retain flexibility in implementation? Pause here to see if anyone has any comments or feedback on those 2. Yes, Board Member Sierra.
Yes, this on this issue is kind of similar in a number of places when I was reviewing the field training materials. And I'm not sure, again, I'm not sure how realistic this is, but this would be something for discussion and maybe for post feedback. But there were a couple of places where, you know, there may be, sometimes there was a reference to materials that officers could refer to, like, you know, the DR, I don't know, forget the numbers, 13, or there'd be references to where the domains 3 and 42. But there were a number of places, and this may be one of them, where would it be helpful in these materials to at least cross-reference where a training officer who wants to kind of follow up about, like, okay, cultural awareness, or, you know, whatever this issue is, to where can I go back to my previous training materials, you know, to review that, or to be able to discuss that with my trainee. And, you know, and not just something very general, but just maybe even, you know, more explicit, like where that information is, what page numbers, where to look for. Because I thought there may be some places that it could be helpful, and that we would know that all of the field training officers have that same reference, at least, so there is some uniformity. That was one thought I had in that area.
Thank you, Board Member Sierra. Do any other board members have any thoughts on the cultural competency response from post and the questions I posed? I'm gonna take that. Oh, go ahead, Manju.
Yeah, I mean, just quickly, I tend to agree with you, Ronnie, in terms of the need for greater training and emphasis on cultural competency. I know that when I reviewed this, one of the issues that came up for me is that there seemed to be an underlying current that communities of color had a culture, and that what the standard was is sort of cultureless. And so that rather than seeing like every community has a culture, right? White communities, and even within that, very specific white communities have different cultures that we have to be attuned to. It just so happens because of history and power that one communities is taken as the default, and then the others all become additive. And I think what we need to do is really change that up in terms of what I think would enhance adherence to RIPA, but also create better connections between law enforcement and their communities, is if there was, rather than, a feeling of either defensiveness or, why do we have to do this again for these people? Really an understanding overall that every person brings their own culture to their interaction with law enforcement, as do law enforcement officers bring culture to it. And there is also, on top of community cultures, there is a law enforcement culture. So understanding these sort of nuances, I think, would benefit law enforcement interactions on their end, and certainly would benefit community members as they are interacting with police. When we talk about issues of deference, when we talk about issues of consent, when certainly one that I raised with DOJ in some conversations were around even language access. So in Alabama, there, two officers who happened to be white went up to a Indian American gentleman who was visiting from India, visiting his newborn grandchild. When he did not respond to their inquiries, they thought he was being evasive. So that is their culture, right? He did not look them in the eye, because that is not the way he was raised, to look authority figures in the eye. And he didn't understand English. Well, what they took that as is defiance, and then they beat the hell out of him. So, so that happens to be an example of where there were two very different cultures. There were even two different languages. And unfortunately, that then resulted in significant harm to the community member because of a lack of awareness of the cultures and a lack of interest in understanding those differences.
Thank you, Board Member Kulkarni. Go ahead, Board Member Randolph.
Thank you, Chairman Vieta. Just a point of clarification for Angela. She talked about maintaining information, solidarity when it comes to the training. The training has a binder. It depends on the organization, the department, the size. They might have a binder, or they have a training folder in a computer. And as that trainee traverses through their 1 through 3, 4 phases, every FTO sees that. So when you go over to the next training officer, so if there were deficiencies, special call, something that stood out, and they come back to that again, that's where you start to identify those patterns we've talked about, whether it's some type of bias that's been or some type of discrimination or some kind of deficiency, it will start to be identified, and that lays down the pattern, or you make the correction. So I just wanted to say that information continues through the trainees FTO, and will continue after the trainee completes their training, because they're still on probation. So now they've got a year to prove themselves and make sure they meet all the credentials that they need for on the post standards and the agency policies. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Board Member Randolph. Guess for myself, like the question that comes to mind for me is, how many hours within the FTO course, like specifically, address this content, and also just like how are FTOs tested on it, right? Like are they, is it like a rigorous test and they complete like an evaluation, or is it more like, hey, you get credit for attending this class and now you're certified to do this. Yeah, and I think for the second question, right, like should post establish a more standardized statewide expectation for evaluating cultural competency? I mean, to me, that's a yes. I think we should have a higher standard. I understand that giving like agencies flexibility to kind of, do more in the sense of, supplemental materials or they can add things to it, right? That's great. And I know some agencies probably excel at that, but I think if we were to raise the bar higher and make that the minimum, it could, it would ensure more consistency across the state. I understand like giving agencies flexibility, and I think that's great. We're talking about like there's a floor and then there's a ceiling, right? And the floor is like, here's the minimum, right? But the ceiling is like, here are all the things that you can potentially do to address cultural competency. So to me, on the second one, I think folks should definitely raise that bar so that it's more standardized statewide. And I see Board Member Ford, do you have your hand up?
I do, but I'll relinquish my thought.
So the second portion is stop data reporting within the FTP. So post response stated that stop data requirements are introduced during orientation and policy training. They're reinforced during field activities and evaluated through documentation and testing, with FTOs verifying entries and coaching on errors. So first question there is, should stop data reporting requirements be more prominently incorporated into FTP standards or evaluation criteria? What additional safeguards, if any, would the board recommend to ensure consistent reporting practices among trainees? So those are the two questions that we have for stop data. And I'm going to pause here and let board members have a moment to give comment. Board Member Randolph.
Thank you so much, Chair Vieta. Stop data is constantly going on. So, I mean, every time a peace officer is having that contact, they have to complete their stop data that evening or after that call. So it's constantly being handled and monitored. So it's constantly being drilled in our peace officers now in our state, even after training on their own. So when we talk about stop data, it's a constant evolution, and it's cross-referenced. Depending on the size of organization, a sergeant, a captain, a commander will review it at the end of the week. Hey, how come you haven't turned this in? And they're spoken to. And I'm not here to talk about like each agency's policies, but there are policies that are instituted in all of our agencies throughout the state on their stop data. So it's just a constant, it's a part of the policing component now in the state of California. That's all.
Board Member Sierra.
So, so Chief Randolph, are you saying that, because I don't believe the data collection is explicitly broken out into the DOR, the daily review, but are you saying it's just is a part of it gets subsumed in the aspect of, are you doing your, daily officer duties, correctly or incorrectly?
So I'll just think about a DOR right now that I would have completed. So officer so-and-so, officer made contact with 13 individuals. Here's all the calls for service that they did. Officer so-and-so completed 6 stop datas in the system. And I as an FTO witnessed him, and they completed it with minimal to additional guidance into the system. And depending on the system, there's multiple systems in the state that agencies use for their stop data. It goes through. And so when I complete a stop data, it goes and it's reviewed by the FTO, should be reviewed by a sergeant, eventually someone at upper command, and then eventually it's sent off to DOJ. So yes, it would be reflected in the DOR. And because here's the big one is, are you going to sign off on on a trainee who keeps forgetting to do their stop data? Absolutely not, because that's going to get you fired, right? Failure to follow the policies and procedures that are implemented. So once again, I'm glad you brought that up. Stop data is a constant part. It's ingrained in our peace officers. The academy and post is just a small part of it. The bigger part is in training. The bigger part is when they're out on their own. So now I'm done with training and I'm working the streets. I didn't do my stop data. Stand by, because sooner or later that's going to show up in an audit, and trainees that have completed training are going to get called in, and some could get put back into training and further discipline. So thanks for asking.
Any other responses from board members? I'll take the silence as a no. I mean, definitely agree that stop data it's important to the work that, I mean, it's foundational, right? It's literally how we do our work, right? And I feel like, I don't know, maybe it needs to be more uniform. I don't know how we actualize that into reality, but it is important. And I think when it comes to, like, you know, maybe something that we can, I guess, just an additional safeguard potential. You know, how can we incorporate, like, you know, the perception based biased demographic data, like, before the contact? I think that would be like that'd be a valuable, like, touch point in the data to just understand how officers are approaching, you know, contact with community members. Yeah, that's just like my overall just general thought on stop data. The next, okay, go ahead, board member Randolph.
And I'm glad you brought that up. So because this has been something I've thought about. So you see a vehicle run the stop sign at 2:00 in the morning, and you make contact with the driver. It's 2:00 in the morning, and there's no streetlights. Did that officer know the ethnicity of the violator, the driver, at the time at 2 a.m.? So that is something that I'm glad you're talking about. Hey, what's the perception of the officers before making contact? But I'd be curious, and this has been talked about, is DOJ collecting data, or eventually the RIPA saying, did we know the ethnicity of the person prior to contact? And it's actually been refuted. So that has been a concern on the law enforcement side, because I'm pretty sure if you looked at that data, the numbers would be pretty astonishing. Thank you.
With that, for the sake of timeliness, I'm going to move over to standardized tools to support consistent evaluation. Again, post identified 6 categories of tools available to support consistency. Standardized DOR language, behavioral rating anchors, FTP checklists and sign-off forms, FTO cue cards and prompts, scenario evaluation rubrics, and audit and feedback mechanisms. So I guess the questions for us to think about is, which of the tools identified by post would provide the greatest benefit in improving evaluator consistency across agencies? And the second question is, would mandatory checklists, cue cards, or evaluation rubrics improve consistency without creating an unnecessary administrative burden? Third question is, are there additional tools or resources the board would recommend to support FTOs in evaluating cultural competency and bias-free policing? And I think the last question here is, should periodic audits of DORs and training evaluations be encouraged or required to ensure consistency and quality control? Policy here. Any board member thoughts or feedback for this section? Yes, board member Sierra.
Yes, so the reference to the FTOQ cards and the scenario evaluation rubric. I don't know, have we seen those? I mean, it's obviously difficult to comment on them without seeing those. And as I understand it, those are discretionary for agencies to use. I may be wrong, but that's my understanding. So it seemed like that might be something helpful for us to look at if we are going to be thinking about making any kind of commentary or recommendations about some additional tools, because maybe those would be, very helpful. Maybe we might want to recommend some modifications, but unless I'm misunderstanding what these are, I don't think we've seen them.
See head nods there from board member Kokorny and board member Randolph.
Is that a
Would you-
question, one that DOJ can answer for us now?
That was my next, that was my segue.
Can you repeat the question, please?
Board member Sierra, can you please repeat the question?
Yes, the question I had is the reference to the FTOQ cards and the scenario evaluation rubric. There may have been one other item that was listed by post. And my question is, have we seen those, or is that something that we could take a look at?
No, we have not. And I think that's because it's agency specific. Post offered it to us as examples of what agencies can do.
Okay.
So the current state of affairs is, one agency can have a certain type of cue card, system with cue cards, and a neighboring agency might have a different way of doing the cue cards. But I can certainly ask Post if they have examples of these and share them with the team, with the committee.
Well, thank you for clarifying that. Okay, because I misunderstood. I thought they were post materials.
No, they're not. The
Mhm.
Post offered it as, this is a way that agencies can institute this, but it's not required.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marisol. I see member Kokorny.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for that answer. I think then it does make it difficult to answer some of these questions, which is, with every agency having its own tools, its own protocols and procedures, like how does one then make recommendations across the board when some are using X tools, others are using Y tools, and there's not necessarily visibility on what all of those tools are. So I think it's, there's always sort of the carrot and the stick. And I think a lot of folks in law enforcement see RIPA as a stick. And yet what we are seeing right now is it makes it impossible to sort of look for carrots in terms of what are best practices, because we don't even know what they're using right now, given that it's not standardized across the board. So I just want to name that particular challenge to what we're trying to do even today is that lack of information and the lack of visibility is sort of ham-fisting us in terms of like our ability to provide positive kind of feedback or recommendations.
Ronnie, you're muted, sir.
Sorry, can I make one additional point, which is I do think to answer the questions posed that periodic audits and training evaluations would be, I think, should be encouraged to ensure consistency and quality control. Yeah, thanks.
Looks like you're having some technical difficulties, Ronnie.
What about now? Still no? Yes? Perfect. I see Board Member Randolph, you have your hand up.
Yes, just a point of clarification for Ms. Kulkarni. Post already conducts random audits throughout the state. All law enforcement agencies have to go through audits and any kind of complaints. So that includes making sure your training standards are being met, making sure also your everyone's went to their classes that they need to do, and FTOs are a part of it. The FTO program is also evaluated as well.
Board Member Sierra?
Yes, I just wanted to also follow up on this idea of, we don't know what other agencies are, additional tools are using. That's true. And it may not be a one size fits all, but maybe, the fact that we know that some agencies are using these additional tools, that may be an area, because as I was going through our draft and seeing some of the observations and potential recommendations, kind of thinking about, hopefully you can still hear me. You still hear me?
Yes.
How are those integrated in these materials in a way that they're still, can be practically used for the training officer? And, I think I think it'd be helpful when we do arrive at some recommendations and maybe giving examples of ways that these ways to strengthen the materials, should they be in the evaluation definitions, or should they be in the DOR? But maybe to some extent we may be able to think about, well, some of these ways to strengthen it maybe is asking that some standardized cue cards or scenario based cards be used, and with some kind of a minimum information in those. So, that just may be a way to think about how to provide guidance to any recommendations we may have and strengthen these materials, because we got to think about how the training officer is actually going to be using these materials day to day. So.
Thank you for that, Board Member Sierra. I had a thought here. Oh, yeah, going back to like the last one, where like, should we raise the standard? I think part of that question is, right, if they were to mandate, the mandatory checklist, cue cards, or evaluation rubrics across the state and create that standard, it would give us something to consistently be able to review and look at as well, to see how, just to pull the data from it, to see how it's being applied in the FTO training. And I think the last one, right, there's, the fourth question that I think is important is, should periodic audits of DORs and training evaluations be encouraged or required to ensure consistency and quality control? I think that it should be required. I think that will ensure consistency. I think, the way that it currently is kind of structured is that Post kind of reviews the blank templates, right? Yeah. So for me, on this last one, and for the record, I believe that it should be required. I don't think it should be encouraged. I think with adding that like additional layer would create more consistency across the board for us in terms of the information we receive and the data that we interpret from that information. And the next one is continuity of content. So we have, I believe it's 4 questions here. Should FTOs be explicitly directed to reference concepts from LD3 and LD42 during evaluations? Would formal guidance from post requiring LD3 and LD42 integration strengthen continuity across training stages? Which of the continuity mechanisms identified by post would be most valuable to formalize statewide? And are there additional mechanisms the board would recommend to strengthen continuity throughout an officer's career? And I think just for reference, I think post response was FTOs are not specifically directed to use LD3 or LD42 during evaluations. Continuity occurs primarily through the SEGs and DORs. Post then lists recommended continuity practices. So it's a curriculum mapping, cross-referencing LD3 and LD42 concepts, shared behavioral expectations, academy to FTP handoff documentation, and CPT reinforcement. I'll pause here to let board members share their thoughts if they have any on this. I'm going to take the silence as there are no thoughts or feedback on this section. For me, it's just like I think FTOs should be explicitly directed to reference LD3 and LD42 during evaluations. I think it's important to have that integrated within the training. Yeah. Board Member Sierra.
Yeah, I think it's kind of related to the point I made earlier, I think there's a lot of good content in LD3 and 42. And to the extent that that is I think an important tool. It could be an important tool for the training officer. And there are some references to it in the materials, but yeah, I think it could be maybe more explicit or exactly where, because I think it would be helpful. You might as well leverage that information as much as possible. And I don't think that ads would add much of a burden. I mean, happy to hear otherwise, but I just think it would be a good reference, for the training officer and the trainee to know, where exactly in LD 42 is this covered, because there, like I said, it's pretty good content in there.
Thank you for that, Board Member Sierra. Yeah, and recruits, they receive 42 combined hours in the academy, right? So I think this is it would be a great way to just reinforce it, right? Rather than it being kind of discretionary between agencies. And the last one for this one, outcome-based training. So post position on this one is evaluator consistency across FTOs is maintained through the use of SEGs and DORs. And post does not currently anticipate revisions to diversity-related performance standards, documentation guidance, or Section 6 requirements. So do you guys have any thoughts on that? Taking the silence as no thoughts on that one. I believe last agenda item here is the board discussion of the 2027 report. Just a second here. This one's long. Right, so so we're gonna now discuss the consultant's recommendations as highlighted in the report draft. So the consultants highlighted the need for more explicit instruction on racial and identity profiling. For instance, incorporating more direct references to racial and identity profiling throughout Section 6, reinstating earlier more explicit language previously contained in Section 6.4.01 regarding the prohibition against profiling, including discussion of harms profiling causes to legitimacy and community trust, expanding discussion of stop data collection and accountability systems, and providing trainees with more concrete guidance regarding how profiling can occur in practice. The FTP should more clearly communicate that policing effectiveness depends highly on community trust, legitimacy, and respectful treatment. The consultants recommended that Section 6 incorporate more explicit references to respect, cooperation, equity, legitimacy, procedural justice, community partnership, and de-escalation. While the consultants found that Section 6 includes reference to community culture and community history, they noted those concepts are treated too narrowly without sufficient context. And this was also echoed in our rubrics. They also, oh, sorry. Go ahead, Board Member Ford. I see your hand up.
Yeah, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I wanted you to go ahead and finish your thought, but I did have a mention about this particular section it was just an agreement, right? I think that there's too much left to interpretation, right? So when we use the language of respect, I think that one of the things that was already mentioned, I'm not sure if it was by board member Kulkarni who used the example in Alabama. I think what respect looks like could be different depending on the cultural values, perspectives, worldview, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that reinforcing and unpacking what respect is, I think is going to be critically important because we all come to it as very different experiences based on our own nurture. And I think that we can learn better, do better, and be able to have better outcomes. And so I just wanted to kind of just double down on that particular idea that I think that there really is a great need for not just unpacking, but really spending time delving into what it can look like and how it can be experienced so that it's not left up to an individual's interpretation about what respect is and or is not.
That Board Member Ford. I think I'm just going to open it up. Do any other board members have thoughts on the draft for the post subcommittee? I know, Rich, you mentioned earlier that you want to discuss something. I see Board Member Sierra, you have your hand up.
Rich, do you want to go first? Go ahead.
Yeah, I pretty much said what the majority throughout the meeting. So I do have a question for Department of Justice. So Ms. Leon, I heard you say when we were talking about the homework assignments that were community-based organizations. I just want to do a clarification. Were the community-based organizations that completed the homework as well, or was this only subcommittee members for that?
No. I meant to say that we were very excited to see that within this subcommittee, we had representatives from law enforcement, that is peace officers, and we had folks fill out the rubric from community-based organizations. And because, as always, your suggestions and feedback are written up as an entity, we keep those responses anonymous. So that's why we didn't attribute certain questions to certain board members, to certain subcommittee board members, but organization representatives complete the rubric and give us feedback on the FTP.
So the community-based organizations, are they going to be listed in the report, the ones that completed the rubric? And how were they selected?
Oh, I'm sorry. By community-based organizations, I meant the community-based organizations that, for instance, Co-Chair Kulkarni represents a community-based organization.
Thank you. And the last thing is, I know we talked about the last meeting and there was quite a bit of discussion about it, about board members going to the academies. I know there was quite a bit of interest there. Do you know how that's looking? Because I had offered that assistance.
Oh, I mean, we're extremely grateful that you offered that assistance. We do have one current subcommittee board member in conversations with Long Beach PD to do a ride-along, and any other subcommittee members who want to do ride-alongs can reach out and we'll put them in touch with a specific jurisdiction that is most convenient for them or that they're particularly interested in. So we're really excited that that's happening. It is not being organized by the Cal DOJ. We're just putting people in touch with the right law enforcement agencies.
Thank you so much for clarifying that.
Board Member Sierra.
Yes, thank you. One area I think that we could strengthen this part of our draft is with respect to the consultants' suggestions and recommendations. Some of them, they're high level, and general, and again, it's not necessarily. We want, thinking in some instances, these are going to be suggestions that would apply to all field training officers, but it may be helpful to be able to get their input and incorporate it into this draft, that if, posts were to agree that, to enhance these materials in, whatever item we're at in this report, that if the consultants might provide like an example, not for every single suggestion, but some examples like this could be accomplished, for example, by adding language to the SAGs, or this could be accomplished by adding a new line item to the DOR, because I think the more concrete we can be, without like dictating that, but just to give it a little more context, I think, or an example of, what type of information, possibly could be added, I think would be helpful. So if we were just a little bit more concrete and, throughout. And then for our next meeting, this is a question for DOJ, if it's possible to have our consultants, oh no, I apologize about my dog, our consultants with us, and if any representatives from Post want to be attend and be part of this discussion, because we may very well have questions to make sure like we understand what the observations they're making, to make sure we fully understand those.
Thank you, Board Member Sierra. That's actually something that we neglected to mention. We wanted to ask the committee if they were interested in having the DOJ consultants come to the next subcommittee meeting to answer your questions and to engage with them in a dialogue. And we can certainly invite Post to our third subcommittee meeting. They do extend their regrets for not being able to come today. They had already previously agendized for other obligations, but they graciously provided us with their written responses. So we can certainly invite Post and the consultants to the next subcommittee meeting if that's something that the board members want us to do.
Thank you. I think it would be helpful.
I do as well. I think we should definitely invite them to the next subcommittee meeting. And I see Manju, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I generally support the recommendations from the consultants, but also think, agree with Board Member Sierra about having them join, and then also just being more concrete. I believe we're over time. Is that right?
Yes.
We're supposed to end at 2. So
Correct.
just knowing that I have to actually go off to another meeting, if I could just take a minute, since this is my last post-subcommittee meeting, I just wanted to express my sincere gratitude to my fellow board members. It's been amazing working with you all. And I know even though we may have at times disagreements, we're all, I think, in alignment that we want to see improvement in law enforcement. We want to see equity. We want to see justice. And so I really am honored that I've been a part of this subcommittee and part of RIPA for the last 5 years. Wanted to especially thank the DOJ staff, including Yasmin, Alex, Marisol, Noel, others, and Aisha, who is a consultant who I've really had the pleasure of working with closely during my tenure, as well as the past DOJ staff who also were phenomenal. You all really, I think, make this work possible. You take it, you make it stronger, and I think your leadership has been really critical in terms of what we've been able to accomplish. And lastly, I just wanted to thank community members who join us at all of our meetings. Your insights and input is really valuable, and really appreciate how important you take citizenship and civic responsibility in being a part of this process. So thank you all. I will miss you. I will make every effort to be there at the July 17th meeting, as it will be my last RIPA board meeting, but just wanted to say to this committee specifically. And lastly, Ronnie, to you for your leadership over the years. It's been great being co-chairs with you, but also I know you had this role before I even joined you, and you've done an amazing job. So thank you so much.
Thank you,
Thank you
board
so
member.
much. Thank you so much, Board Member Kulkarni. In the interest of time, and if Co-Chair Kulkarni has to step off,
Yes.
I wanted to ask Co-Chair Villeda if we should move to public comment to
Yes.
provide the public with an opportunity to engage.
Yes, of course. And with that, and on the feedback, we can also provide written feedback to DOJ on the report. So if that something was left unsaid here, we can email DOJ with our
Yes,
response.
please. We would love that.
And with that, I will move to public comment. Is there anybody? Yes, Michelle.
Good afternoon, board members. It's my understanding that the race implicit association test is officially recommended by POST to be included in mandatory coursework. Project Implicit has been the online source of that race IAT for over 25 years. Less well known is the weakness of the race IAT as a predictor of biased behavior, although it's been known within academic circles for at least 15 years. Yet the race IAT is too often used as if it's a measure of implicit racial bias. Let's start with the acronym IAT. It stands for Implicit Association Test, not Implicit Bias Test. Why is that? Well, the test rests on a simple assumption. If reaction times in favor of white and good, black and bad are faster than reaction times to things like black and good or white and bad, a person is implicitly shown to be biased, favoring white people. However, there's no compelling evidence that reaction time differences map onto biased behavior toward Black people. Why is this a problem? It may be measuring simple knowledge of American culture that is filled with racial stereotypes that associate Black people with negative attributes. Mere awareness of these stereotypes might influence IAT scores, even if people hold favorable attitudes towards Black people or African Americans as a group. Even African Americans are aware of these stereotypes, and their responses could be influenced by these associations. I could go on, but the bottom line is we should not allow the race IAT to encourage us to make judgments about implicit bias in the absence of correlation with actual behavior. Thank you.
Fortunately, Ronnie, I don't think we can't hear you. I can't hear you. No.
No, your audio's going through some technical difficulties. He's gonna sign off and sign back on.
Okay.
Do we have
Are there
any other
other-
members of the
Yeah,
public?
other folks making public comment.
Sorry, can you guys hear me now?
Yep.
Yeah, I think my computer's just getting too hot and it's like wigging out. Thank you for the public comment. Is there any other public comment? No? So next steps is please submit feedback to DOJ on the draft section of the report. We will invite the consultants and post to the next meeting. And with that, I think we can adjourn. Thank you, everyone.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.